Hello, everyone. Before we start, make sure to like and subscribe to the channel and leave a comment with where you're from and what time you're watching. That way, YouTube will keep showing you stories just like this one. Now, let's begin. I'm a neonatal intensive care nurse at Children's Medical Center in Dallas, Texas. Or at least I was until I submitted my resignation 3 weeks ago. You can call me Sarah Mitchell if you want, though most people in the NICU just called me Nurse Sarah during my 14 years there. I've seen everything you can imagine in neonatal care: premature births, congenital heart defects, respiratory distress, surgical complications, and every kind of challenge that the tiniest human beings can face in their first days of life. But what I'm about to tell you about is the one case that made me question everything I thought I knew about infant development and ultimately led me to leave the profession entirely. Children's Medical Center is a Level 4 neonatal intensive care unit serving the greater Dallas metropolitan area and parts of East Texas. It's a state-of-the-art facility built in 2003 with a 60-bed NICU that handles the most critical newborn cases in the region. During my time there, I worked primarily the night shift, 7 p.m. to 7 a.m., because I preferred the quieter environment and the closer relationships you develop with the babies during those long, peaceful hours. Night shifts in the NICU are different from other hospital departments. The lights are dimmed to promote healthy sleep cycles for the infants. The atmosphere is hushed and gentle. You might spend hours just monitoring tiny heartbeats and ensuring proper feeding schedules, creating an almost sacred space where new life fights its earliest battles. The night of March 3, 2023, started like any other. It was a Friday, which typically meant we might see emergency transfers from smaller hospitals or babies born with complications during busy weekend labor and delivery periods. The weather was mild for early March in Texas, and by 8:30 p.m., our census was at 42 babies, well within our normal capacity. I had been assigned to the intermediate care section that night, working with babies who were stable enough to be weaned off intensive monitoring but still required specialized nursing care before going home. My patient assignment included 6 infants, ranging from 32-week preemies gaining weight before discharge to full-term babies recovering from minor surgical procedures. It was the kind of assignment I loved, working with babies who were past the critical danger period but still needed that extra attention and care that would prepare them for life outside the hospital. I was finishing my initial assessments around 9:15 p.m. when Dr. Patricia Chen, our attending neonatologist, approached me with a concerned expression I had rarely seen in her 20 years of practice. "Sarah, we're getting a transport from Presbyterian Hospital in about 20 minutes. Full-term infant, born at 38 weeks, but there are some unusual circumstances I need to brief you about. The baby is medically stable, but the delivery team reported some behaviors that don't fit typical newborn patterns." "What kind of behaviors?" I asked, already mentally preparing for whatever complex case was heading our way. The infant was born after a completely normal pregnancy and delivery. No complications, no distress, perfect APGAR scores. But within hours of birth, the nurses that they described as unusual Presbyterian started noticing what vocalizations. Not crying, not the typical sounds newborns make, but something they couldn't quite categorize. They also reported that the baby seemed unusually alert and responsive for a newborn, maintaining eye contact for extended periods and appearing to track conversations around the room. This didn't sound particularly alarming to me. Some babies are naturally more alert than others, and unusual sounds could be explained by any number of minor respiratory or digestive issues that resolve quickly. But Dr. Chen continued with details that made me pay closer attention. "Sarah, 3 different nurses at Presbyterian independently reported that they heard this baby making sounds that resembled whispered words. Not baby babbling, not random vocalizations, but what sounded like actual whispered speech. The charge nurse there has 30 years of experience, and she specifically requested the transfer because she said she had never encountered anything like it." I felt a slight chill run down my spine, though I tried to rationalize what Dr. Chen was telling me. Newborns occasionally make sounds that can seem like words to hopeful parents and staff. The human brain is wired to find patterns and meaning in random sounds, especially when we're dealing with something as emotionally charged as a newborn baby. But 3 experienced nurses independently reporting the same observation was certainly unusual. "What about the parents?" I asked. How are they handling this? That's another concerning aspect. The mother, Jennifer Walsh, is 28 years old, married, no previous pregnancies, completely normal prenatal care. But she's been unusually distressed since the delivery, not because of any medical issues, but because she claims the baby has been trying to communicate with her. The father seems supportive, but overwhelmed. They specifically requested the transfer here because they want the best possible evaluation of their child. Dr. Chen handed me the transfer paperwork and continued. I want you to take this case personally, Sarah. You have the most experience with unusual presentations, and I trust your clinical judgment. But I also want you to document everything meticulously, every sound, every behavior, every interaction. If this baby is exhibiting atypical neurological development, we need comprehensive records for the pediatric neurology consultation I'm planning to schedule. The ambulance arrived at 9:47 p.m., and I met the transport team at our receiving bay. The paramedic, Tom Rodriguez, whom I had worked with numerous times over the years, looked visibly unsettled as he wheeled the isolette toward our unit. Sarah, this is the strangest transport I've done in 15 years, he said quietly as we walked. I've heard a lot of babies cry, a lot of different sounds, but this little one has been making noises the entire trip that I can't explain. It's like listening to someone trying to talk underwater. As we entered the NICU, I got my first look at baby Walsh. She was beautiful, perfectly formed, with dark hair and remarkably bright eyes for such a young infant. Her color was excellent, her breathing appeared effortless, and all her vital signs on the transport monitor were completely normal. But as I leaned over the isolette to begin my initial assessment, something happened that I had never experienced in 14 years of neonatal nursing. The baby looked directly at me, made sustained eye contact, and opened her mouth as if she was trying to speak. What came out was not a cry, not a typical newborn vocalization, but a soft, breathy sound that unmistakably resembled the word help. It was whispered so quietly that I almost convinced myself I had imagined it, but the timing was too perfect. The mouth movements too deliberate, and the eye contact too intense to dismiss. I stood frozen for several seconds, staring down at this tiny human being who appeared to be trying to communicate with me in a way that was developmentally impossible. Newborns don't have the neurological development, the vocal control, or the cognitive awareness required for intentional speech. Their vocal cords are designed for crying. Their brain development hasn't reached the stage for language processing, and their understanding of communication is limited to basic comfort and distress signals. Tom, did you hear that? I asked the paramedic, who was finishing his paperwork nearby. Hear what? He replied. The baby just made a sound that sounded like she was trying to say something. Tom walked over and looked down at the infant, who was now lying quietly with her eyes closed. She's been doing that the whole trip. Sounds almost like words, but babies can't talk, right? So it must be something else. I completed the admission process, transferring baby Walsh to one of our standard bassinets and connecting her to our monitoring equipment. Her heart rate was a steady 140 beats per minute. Respiratory rate was 45 breaths per minute, temperature was 98.6 degrees, and her oxygen saturation was perfect at 99% on room air. Every medical indicator suggested a completely healthy, normal newborn. But as I worked around her bedside, adjusting blankets and checking her diaper, I continued to hear those soft, whispered sounds that seemed too purposeful to be random. Around 10:30 p.m., the parents arrived from Presbyterian Hospital, looking exhausted and deeply worried. Jennifer Walsh was still recovering from delivery, but had insisted on making the transfer with her daughter. Her husband, Michael, carried their overnight bags and looked like a man who hadn't slept in days. I introduced myself and began explaining our assessment process and what they could expect during their stay. Nurse Sarah. Jennifer interrupted me mid-sentence, her voice trembling with emotion. Please tell me you've noticed something unusual about Emma too. Please tell me we're not losing our minds. Our daughter has been trying to talk to us since she was born, and everyone keeps saying it's impossible, but we know what we're hearing. I looked down at baby Emma, who was awake and alert in her bassinet, those bright eyes moving between her parents and me with what seemed like recognition and awareness. Mrs. Walsh, I said carefully, I have noticed some unusual vocalization since Emma arrived. We're going to monitor her very closely and document everything we observe. Dr. Chen has already planned some consultations with specialists to make sure we understand what's happening. As if responding to her name being mentioned, Emma turned her head slightly toward her mother and made that same soft, breathy sound I had heard earlier. But this time, it was clearer, more distinct, and unmistakably sounded like Mama. Jennifer Walsh gasped and reached toward her daughter, tears streaming down her face. She's been trying to say that all day, but no one would believe us. Michael Walsh moved closer to the bassinet and spoke softly to his daughter. "Hey there, Emma. It's Daddy. Can you say Daddy too?" The baby's eyes shifted to focus on her father's face, and after a moment of what appeared to be concentration, she produced another whispered sound that bore a striking resemblance to, I felt my professional data skepticism battling with what I was witnessing firsthand. Everything in my training told me that what I was observing was medically impossible. Newborns don the neurological development for it possess intentional speech, the vocal cord control for articulated sounds, or the cognitive awareness to respond appropriately to specific verbal cues. But the evidence of my own senses was becoming increasingly difficult to dismiss or explain away. Over the next 2 hours, I documented 17 distinct instances of what appeared to be intentional vocalizations from Emma Walsh. The sounds included variations of Mama, Daddy, help, and what sounded like please. Each vocalization occurred in response to specific stimuli, either direct address from her parents or caregiving activities like feeding preparation or diaper changes. The timing was too consistent, the mouth movements too deliberate, and the eye contact too sustained to attribute to coincidence or wishful thinking. At 11:45 p.m., I called Dr. Chen to update her on Emma's condition and the ongoing vocalizations. She arrived within 20 minutes, looking as puzzled as I felt when I briefed her on what I had observed and documented. "Patricia, this goes against everything we know about neonatal development," I told her as we stood outside Emma's room. "But I have 3 hours of detailed notes, and both parents are consistent witnesses to behavior that started immediately after birth." Dr. Chen entered the room and spent nearly an hour conducting her own assessment of Emma. She performed standard neurological tests, checked reflexes, examined muscle tone, and evaluated the baby's responses to various stimuli. Throughout the examination, Emma remained calm and alert, occasionally producing those soft whispered sounds that seemed to correspond with Dr. Chen's activities. When Dr. Chen used her pen light to check Emma's pupils, the baby appeared to whisper, "Bright." When she tested the rooting reflex by stroking Emma's cheek, the response sounded distinctly like, "Hungry." "Sarah," Dr. Chen said quietly as we stepped into the hallway afterward, "in 20 years of neonatal medicine, I have never encountered anything remotely similar to this presentation. Every aspect of this infant's medical condition is completely normal, but the vocalizations you've documented are neurologically impossible for a newborn. I'm ordering an immediate EEG and MRI when she's stable enough for transport, and consultations with pediatric neurology, genetics, and developmental specialists." The EEG was performed at 2:01 a.m. using our portable equipment to avoid moving Emma unnecessarily. The technician, Maria Santos, had been working in neurological testing for over a decade and was familiar with normal newborn brainwave patterns. As she attached the electrodes to Emma's tiny scalp, the baby remained unusually cooperative, almost as if she understood what was happening. Most newborns fight the electrode placement, crying and moving their heads. But Emma lay still and maintained that intense eye contact throughout the procedure. "Maria, what are you seeing?" Dr. Chen asked as the EEG readings appeared on the monitor. "This is highly unusual," Maria replied, adjusting the settings to confirm her readings. "The brainwave patterns I'm recording are consistent with someone much older than a newborn. The alpha waves, the organization of the electrical activity, the response patterns to stimuli, this looks more like the EEG of a 6-month-old infant, maybe older." As if to emphasize the point, Emma turned her head toward the EEG machine and produced what sounded unmistakably like wires. Her eyes focused on the equipment with apparent recognition of its purpose. Maria stepped back from the machine, visibly shaken. "Dr. Chen, I've performed hundreds of these tests on newborns. They don't typically show awareness of the equipment, and they certainly don't vocalize in response to medical procedures with what sounds like appropriate terminology. I spent the remainder of that night shift meticulously documenting every interaction with Emma Walsh. Her feeding responses were normal. She slept in typical newborn patterns. Her diaper changes proceeded without complications, and her vital signs remained stable throughout the night. But interspersed with these routine activities were moments that challenged everything I thought I knew about infant development and consciousness. Around 4:00 a.m., while I was adjusting Emma's blanket, she looked directly at me and whispered what sounded like, "Sarah." I froze, staring down at her, wondering if I had somehow projected my own thoughts onto random baby sounds. But then she repeated it, clearer this time, "Sarah," while maintaining that intense eye contact that seemed to convey recognition and intentionality. I leaned closer to her bassinet and spoke softly. "Emma, can you really understand what I'm saying?" She blinked once, slowly and deliberately, then whispered, "Yes," so quietly that I had to strain to hear it. The rational part of my mind insisted that I was experiencing some kind of auditory hallucination brought on by stress and fatigue. But the evidence was becoming increasingly difficult to deny or explain away through conventional medical understanding. Over the next hour, I conducted what I can only describe as the most surreal conversation of my nursing career. I asked Emma simple yes or no questions, and she consistently responded with single blinks for yes and double blinks for no, accompanied by whispered confirmations that matched her blinking patterns. When I asked if she was comfortable, single blink and a whispered yes. When I asked if she was in pain, double blink and no. When I asked if she was scared, single blink followed by what sounded like little. The implications of what I was experiencing were staggering. If Emma Walsh truly possessed the cognitive awareness and communication abilities I was documenting, it represented a complete anomaly in human development that challenged fundamental assumptions about consciousness, language acquisition, and neurological maturation. Newborns are not supposed to possess self-awareness, intentional communication skills, or the ability to engage in purposeful interaction with their environment beyond basic comfort and survival responses. At 5:30 a.m., Jennifer Walsh woke from the brief sleep she had managed in the reclining chair beside Emma's bassinet. She immediately looked toward her daughter, who turned her head toward her mother's voice and whispered, "Mama," with what appeared to be genuine affection and recognition. Jennifer began crying again, overwhelmed by the emotional impact of what seemed like her newborn daughter's attempts to communicate love and connection. "Nurse Sarah," Jennifer said through her tears, "everyone keeps telling us this is medically impossible, but Emma has been trying to talk to us since she was born. She responds to our voices, she seems to understand what we're saying, and she makes sounds that are too specific to be coincidental. We're not crazy, are we? Please tell us we're not imagining this." I sat down beside Jennifer's chair and chose my words carefully. "Mrs. Walsh, I've been documenting Emma's vocalizations and responses throughout the night. What you're observing is highly unusual, and we're taking it very seriously. Dr. Chen has ordered comprehensive testing to help us understand what's happening. I want you to know that your observations are being heard and investigated by our entire medical team." Michael Walsh had been quiet throughout most of the night, but as dawn began to break through the NICU windows, he moved closer to his daughter's bassinet and spoke directly to her. "Emma, sweetie, if you can really understand us, we want you to know how much we love you and how amazed we are by you." Emma's response was the clearest vocalization I had heard from her yet. She whispered, "Love, Daddy," in a way that was unmistakably intentional and emotionally appropriate. As my shift neared its end at 7 a.m., I completed the most detailed nursing notes of my entire career. I had documented 31 distinct vocalizations that resembled words or phrases, 28 instances of apparently purposeful eye contact and tracking, 15 examples of what appeared to be appropriate responses to specific questions or stimuli, and multiple observations of behavior that suggested cognitive awareness far beyond typical newborn capabilities. But what troubled me most was not the medical impossibility of what I was witnessing. but the growing certainty that Emma Walsh was somehow aware of being trapped in a body that couldn't yet support the level of consciousness and communication ability she seemed to possess. There was something almost desperate about some of her vocalizations, particularly when she whispered, "help," or "please," as if she was trying to convey something important that she couldn't fully express through her limited physical capabilities. When the day shift nurse arrived to take over Emma's care, I spent 40 minutes briefing her on everything I had observed and documented. Lisa Patterson had been working in the NICU for 8 years and was known for her thorough, no-nonsense approach to patient care. As I walked her through my notes and observations, I could see the skepticism in her expression gradually give way to concern and confusion. "Sarah," Lisa said when I finished my report, "this is either the most remarkable case of early neurological development ever documented, or we're dealing with something that falls completely outside normal medical understanding. Either way, this baby is going to need monitoring and evaluation that goes far beyond standard newborn care protocols." As I prepared to leave for the day, I made one final check on Emma before handing over her care completely. She was awake and alert, those remarkably bright eyes following my movements around her bassinet. When I leaned down to say goodbye, she looked directly at me and whispered something that made my blood run cold. It wasn't "goodbye" or "Sarah," like I might have expected. Instead, she whispered, "Remember me," in a tone that carried an emotional weight no newborn should possess. I drove home that morning with my hands shaking on the steering wheel, replaying every moment of the night shift in my mind. I had been a neonatal nurse for 14 years. I had cared for thousands of babies, witnessed medical miracles and heartbreaking losses, and I thought I had seen everything the NICU could possibly present. But Emma Walsh represented something entirely outside my experience and training. I tried to sleep when I got home, but my mind wouldn't stop analyzing what I had witnessed. I found myself researching early childhood development, neurological anomalies, and cases of advanced cognitive abilities in infants. Everything I read confirmed what I already knew from my medical training. Newborns don't possess the neurological infrastructure for intentional speech, the cognitive development for purposeful communication, or the self-awareness required for the kind of interactions I had documented with Emma. By 2:05 p.m., I gave up trying to sleep and called the hospital to check on Emma's status. Lisa answered in the intermediate care unit and immediately launched into an update that made me sit down heavily in my kitchen chair. "Sarah, I'm so glad you called. Emma's behavior today has been even more remarkable than what you documented last night. Dr. Chen brought in Dr. Rebecca Martinez from Pediatric Neurology for an emergency consultation, and she spent 3 hours with Emma this morning. Dr. Martinez has never encountered anything like this in her 15 years of practice." "What kind of behaviors?" I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know the answer. "Emma has been responding to complex instructions, Sarah. Not just simple yes or no questions, but multi-step requests. Dr. Martinez asked her to look at her mother, then look at her father, then look back at the ceiling. Emma followed each instruction perfectly, with appropriate pauses between each action. She also asked Emma to make a sound if she was happy, and Emma produced what sounded distinctly like a laugh. Not a baby giggle, but an actual laugh with appropriate emotional context. I felt that familiar chill running down my spine as Lisa continued her report. But the most unsettling thing happened around noon. Emma's parents were both sleeping, and I was doing routine vital sign checks. Emma looked at me very seriously and whispered something that sounded like, "They don't understand yet." When I asked her what she meant, she whispered, "I'm different," and then closed her eyes and went to sleep. The implications of what Lisa was describing were staggering. If Emma truly possessed the cognitive awareness to make statements about her own condition and her parents' understanding of it, we were dealing with a level of consciousness and self-reflection that shouldn't exist in any newborn, regardless of neurological development or environmental factors. "Have the parents heard about this?" I asked. "They were asleep when it happened, but I documented everything in her chart. Dr. Chen is planning to discuss the situation with them this afternoon. The problem is, we don't have any medical framework for explaining what's happening with Emma. Every test we've run shows a completely healthy newborn, but her behavior suggests cognitive abilities that are months or even years ahead of normal development." I hung up the phone and realized that I needed to be back at the hospital, despite having just completed a 12-hour shift. Emma's case was consuming my thoughts in a way that no other patient ever had, and I felt a personal responsibility to help understand what was happening to her. I also couldn't shake the feeling that Emma herself was somehow counting on me to figure out what was wrong and help her communicate whatever she was trying so desperately to express. When I arrived back at the NICU around 4 p.m., I found Dr. Chen in deep conversation with Dr. Martinez outside Emma's room. Both physicians looked troubled and confused, clearly struggling to reconcile what they were observing with their medical understanding of infant development. "Sarah," Dr. Chen said when she saw me approaching, "I'm glad you're here. Dr. Martinez wanted to speak with you about your observations from last night. She's reviewed all your documentation, and she has some theories about what might be happening with Emma." Dr. Martinez was a woman in her early 40s with a reputation for thorough, evidence-based approach to pediatric neurology. She had consulted on some of our most complex cases over the years, and I respected her clinical judgment immensely. But when she began explaining her assessment of Emma, even she seemed uncertain about her own conclusions. "Nurse Mitchell, what you documented last night represents either the most advanced case of early neurological development ever recorded, or we're dealing with a phenomenon that falls outside conventional medical understanding. I've examined Emma extensively today, and I can confirm that her responses are consistent, appropriate, and far beyond what should be possible for a newborn." "What kind of theories do you have about what might be causing this?" I asked. "That's where things become problematic," she replied. "From a neurological standpoint, Emma's brain should not be capable of the behaviors we're observing. Her neural pathways haven't had time to develop the connections required for language processing, intentional communication, or self-awareness. The myelination of her neurons, the development of her prefrontal cortex, what she's demonstrating. Dr. Martinez, PA, the maturation of her language centers, used and looked toward Emma, none of these processes are advanced enough to support room before continuing. But there's something else that's deeply concerning me. During my examination today, Emma seemed to anticipate my neurological tests before I performed them. When I was preparing to check her reflexes, she would position her limbs appropriately before I even touched her. When I was about to use my pen light to check her pupils, she would close her eyes and then open them at exactly the right moment. It's as if she understood the purpose and sequence of a standard neurological examination. This revelation sent another chill through me. Newborns don't anticipate medical procedures, and they certainly don't demonstrate understanding of examination protocols. Their responses to medical stimuli are purely reflexive, based on basic comfort and discomfort rather than cognitive comprehension of what's happening to them. "Have you been able to communicate with her directly?" I asked Dr. Martinez. "That's perhaps the most remarkable aspect of this case." When I spoke to Emma during my examination, she responded with what appeared to be appropriate emotional and cognitive reactions. When I explained that I was a doctor who wanted to help her, she whispered what sounded like, "Thank you." When I asked if she felt different from other babies, she whispered, "Yes," and what sounded like, "Scared." Most significantly, when I asked if there was something she wanted us to understand about her condition, she whispered, "Trapped." The word "trapped" resonated with my own observations from the previous night. There had been something almost desperate about some of Emma's vocalizations, particularly when she whispered, "Help," or "Please." If she truly possessed advanced cognitive awareness trapped within the physical limitations of a newborn body, it would explain the emotional undertone I had detected in her communications. Dr. Chen joined our conversation as we stood outside Emma's room. Watching her parents interact with their remarkable daughter, Michael and Jennifer Walsh had spent the day trying to process the medical team's reports about Emma's unusual abilities, and the emotional toll was evident on both of them. They looked exhausted, overwhelmed, and desperately worried about their daughter's future. "Sarah," Dr. Chen said, "we've scheduled Emma for an MRI tomorrow morning, and we're bringing in additional specialists for consultations. But I want you to continue as her primary nurse for the next few days. You've developed the most comprehensive documentation of her behaviors, and I think Emma may be more responsive to caregivers she's already interacted with." I agreed immediately, knowing that I wouldn't be able to focus on anything else until we had some answers about Emma's condition. But I also felt a growing sense of responsibility and concern for this tiny human being who seemed to be trying so hard to communicate something important about her experience. That evening, I returned for another night shift, specifically requesting assignment to Emma's care. When I entered her room around 8 p.m., both parents were present, and I could immediately sense the emotional tension in the air. Jennifer was holding Emma, speaking softly to her daughter, while Michael sat nearby, looking like a man struggling to understand something far beyond his experience. "Nurse Sarah," Jennifer said when she saw me, "Emma has been asking for you all afternoon." Every time someone new came into the room, she would whisper your name and look toward the door as if she was expecting you to arrive. The idea that Emma had been specifically requesting my presence was both touching and deeply unsettling. Newborns don't form preferences for specific caregivers within hours of birth, and they certainly don't express those preferences through verbal requests. But as I approached her bedside, Emma turned her head toward me and whispered, "Sarah back?" with what appeared to be genuine pleasure and relief. I spent the next several hours conducting what I can only describe as the most extraordinary series of interactions I had ever experienced with any patient, let alone a newborn. Emma responded to my questions with increasing clarity and complexity, demonstrating not just awareness, but what seemed like personality, preferences, and emotional depth that defied all medical understanding of infant development. When I asked Emma if she remembered our conversation from the previous night, she whispered, "Yes," and what sounded like scary. When I asked if she was still scared, she whispered, "Little bit," and then added what sounded like, "You help." The emotional connection I felt with this tiny patient was unlike anything I'd experienced in my nursing career, and I began to understand why her case was affecting me so profoundly on a personal level. Around 10:30 p.m., Emma's parents decided to try to get some rest in the family lounge, leaving me alone with her for the first time since the previous night. As soon as they left the room, Emma's demeanor changed noticeably. She became more alert, more focused, and began producing vocalizations that were clearer and more complex than anything I had documented before. "Sarah," she whispered, and I leaned closer to make sure I could hear her clearly. "Something's wrong with me. I'm not supposed to be like this." The clarity of her statement was breathtaking and terrifying. Not only was Emma demonstrating advanced language abilities, but she was expressing self-awareness about her own unusual condition. She understood that her development was abnormal, and she seemed to be seeking help in understanding what was happening to her. "Emma," I whispered back, trying to keep my voice calm despite the profound implications of what she was telling me. "Can you explain what you mean when you say something's wrong?" She was quiet for several moments, those bright eyes studying my face with an intensity that was almost adult-like in its focus and assessment. Then she whispered a series of words that would haunt me for weeks afterward. "I remember things," she said softly. "Things from before I was born. Places I've never been, people I've never met. But I can't move my body the way I want to. I can't make the words come out right. I'm stuck in here, and I don't know why." The words Emma whispered sent a chill through me that reached deeper than anything I'd experienced in my medical career. A newborn claiming to have memories from before birth, describing feelings of being trapped in her own body, expressing frustration about her inability to communicate properly. None of this should have been possible from any medical or developmental standpoint I understood. "Emma," I said carefully, leaning closer to her bassinet, "when you say you remember things from before you were born, what kind of things do you remember?" She closed her eyes for a moment, and I could see what appeared to be concentration on her tiny features. When she opened them again, there was something almost ancient in her gaze, as if I were looking into the eyes of someone much older than the 2-day-old infant lying before me. "I remember flying," she whispered so quietly I had to strain to hear her. "Not in an airplane, just flying over places with lots of lights. And I remember a woman with long gray hair who sang to me. She wasn't my mama, but she felt like family." My hands began trembling as I documented her words. The detail and emotional context of what Emma was describing went far beyond typical infant cognitive capabilities. She was recounting what sounded like specific memories, complete with visual details and emotional associations that shouldn't exist in someone who had been alive for less than 48 hours. Can you tell me more about the woman with gray hair? I asked, though part of me wasn't sure I wanted to hear the answer. She was sad about something, Emma replied, her voice carrying a weight of emotion that seemed impossible for someone her age. She kept saying she was sorry, over and over. And she told me I had to go back, that it wasn't my time yet. But I didn't want to leave her. The implications of what Emma was describing were staggering and deeply unsettling. Was she somehow recounting memories from a near-death experience during birth? Was this some kind of neurological phenomenon that created false memories? Or was something far more extraordinary happening that fell completely outside medical understanding? Emma, when you say you had to go back, what do you think that means? Her response came immediately, as if she had been waiting for someone to ask that specific question. I think it means I died, she whispered. I think I died when I was being born, and then I came back. But something got mixed up when I came back. I can remember things I shouldn't remember. And I can think things I shouldn't be able to think. I sat back in my chair, overwhelmed by what I was hearing. Emma's birth records showed no complications, no periods of distress or oxygen deprivation, no medical events that would have resulted in clinical death. Her APGAR scores had been perfect, indicating a healthy, normal delivery and immediate post-birth condition. Yet she was describing what sounded like a near-death experience with remarkable clarity and detail. Do you remember anything else about that time? I asked, knowing I was venturing into territory that had nothing to do with standard medical care. I remember being in a place that was very bright, but not like the lights here, Emma said, her eyes tracking the ceiling lights of the NICU. It was warm and peaceful, and there were other people there, but they looked different. Lighter somehow. And there was music, but not music like people make. It came from everywhere at once. As Emma continued describing her memories, I found myself documenting what could only be described as a detailed near-death experience account from someone who shouldn't have the cognitive development to form such memories, let alone articulate them. Her descriptions included elements commonly reported by adults who had survived clinical death: bright lights, feelings of peace, encounters with deceased relatives, and music or sounds unlike anything experienced in normal life. The woman with gray hair, Emma continued. She showed me things about my life that was going to happen. She showed me you, actually. She said you would help me figure out what was wrong and that I should trust you. The personal nature of this statement hit me like a physical blow. Not only was Emma describing what sounded like prophetic visions, but she was claiming that I had been specifically identified as someone who would play a role in her situation. The rational part of my mind insisted that this was all coincidence, that Emma was somehow picking up on social cues and my obvious concern for her case. But the detail and consistency of her account made dismissal increasingly difficult. Emma, what else did she show you about your life? She showed me that I'm going to be different from other children, Emma replied. And for the first time since our conversation began, she sounded frightened. She showed me that people are going to be scared of me because I can do things other babies can't do. And she showed me that something bad is going to happen to me because of it. The fear in Emma's whispered words was heartbreaking and alarming. If she truly possessed some kind of advanced cognitive abilities, she was apparently aware that these abilities might put her in danger or lead to negative consequences. The idea that a 2-day-old infant was experiencing existential fear about her future was deeply disturbing from both a medical and human perspective. What kind of bad thing did she show you? I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know the answer. People in white coats, like you wear, but different people. They want to study me like I'm not a real person. They want to do things to my brain to see how it works. The gray-haired woman said I have to be very careful about who I trust and who I talk to about these things. Emma's words sent another chill through me. Was she somehow predicting that medical researchers would want to study her unusual abilities? The reference to people in white coats doing things to her brain sounded disturbingly like she was anticipating invasive neurological research or experimentation. Emma, I want you to know that no one here is going to hurt you. We're trying to help you and understand what's happening so we can take better care of you. I know you won't hurt me, Sarah, she replied with a certainty that seemed impossible for someone her age. The gray-haired woman told me you have a good heart and that you would protect me if I needed protection. But she also told me that other people might not understand and that I have to be very careful. Over the next hour, Emma continued sharing details about her memories and experiences that defied every aspect of normal infant development I had ever learned about. She described conversations with other beings in what sounded like an afterlife environment, detailed visions of future events in her life, and an understanding of her own unusual condition that demonstrated self-awareness far beyond her chronological age. But perhaps most disturbing was her growing fear about what would happen to her as her abilities became more apparent to the medical staff caring for her. She seemed to understand that her case would attract attention from researchers and specialists who might view her more as a scientific curiosity than as a human being deserving of protection and care. Around midnight, Emma's parents returned from their rest period, and I could see the exhaustion and worry etched on both their faces. Jennifer immediately went to her daughter's bedside, while Michael lingered near the doorway, looking like a man struggling to process something far beyond his understanding. "Mama," Emma whispered, as soon as Jennifer leaned over her bassinet. "I've been talking to Sarah. She's nice, and she believes me when I tell her things." Jennifer looked at me with tears in her eyes. "Nurse Sarah, Emma has been trying to tell us things all day that don't make sense for a baby to know. She keeps talking about remembering places and people from before she was born. Michael thinks we should ask the doctors to run more tests, but I'm scared about what they might find." I understood Jennifer's fear completely. If Emma's abilities were documented and verified by multiple medical professionals, she would likely become the subject of intensive research and study that might not prioritize her well-being as a child. The scientific and medical communities would be fascinated by a case that challenged fundamental assumptions about consciousness, memory, and infant development. "Mrs. Walsh," I said carefully, "Emma is certainly exhibiting some remarkable abilities that we're working to understand. But I want you to know that our primary concern is her health and well-being as your daughter, not as a medical curiosity." "I appreciate that, Nurse Sarah," Michael said from the doorway. "But we're also terrified about what this means for Emma's future. If she really can remember things from before birth, if she really is as aware and intelligent as she seems, what kind of life is she going to have? How do we raise a child who might be more cognitively advanced than we are?" These were profound questions that I had no training or experience to address. The Walsh family was facing a situation that had no precedent in medical literature or parenting guidance. They were trying to bond with and care for a daughter who might possess consciousness and awareness that surpassed their own understanding. As the night progressed, I continued documenting Emma's remarkable abilities and communications. She demonstrated understanding of complex conversations happening around her room, responded appropriately to emotional cues from her parents, and continued producing vocalizations that resembled advanced language use far beyond typical newborn capabilities. But I also noticed subtle changes in her behavior that concerned me. Emma seemed to be deliberately limiting her responses when other medical staff entered the room, as if she was learning to hide her abilities from people she didn't trust completely. When Dr. Chen stopped by for a routine check around 2 a.m., Emma remained quiet and produced only typical newborn sounds, despite having been engaged in complex communication with me just minutes earlier. After Dr. Chen left, Emma looked directly at me and whispered, "I can't let everyone know everything I can do." The gray-haired woman warned me that some people might want to hurt me if they knew how different I really am. The strategic thinking demonstrated by this statement was remarkable and troubling. Emma was apparently capable of assessing threats, making decisions about information sharing, and modifying her behavior to protect herself from potential harm. These were cognitive abilities that typically developed over years of learning and experience, not hours after birth. "Emma," I said softly, "you're safe here with your parents and with me. But I understand why you might want to be careful about what you share with other people." "Will you help me decide who I can trust?" she asked, and the vulnerability in her whispered words broke my heart. "I don't want to make a mistake and trust the wrong person." I spent the remainder of that night shift in the most emotionally challenging situation of my nursing career. I was caring for an infant who possessed cognitive abilities that defied medical understanding, who claimed to have memories from before birth, and who was apparently capable of strategic thinking about her own safety and future. Emma had somehow formed a trusting relationship with me and was looking to me for guidance and protection in a way that felt more like caring for a frightened adult than a newborn baby. When my shift ended at 7:20 a.m., I found myself reluctant to leave Emma's care to the day shift nurse. Our connection had deepened beyond the typical nurse-patient relationship, and I felt a personal responsibility for her well-being that went far beyond professional duty. Emma seemed to sense my reluctance to leave, and as I prepared to give report to the incoming nurse, she whispered something that would stay with me throughout the day. "Sarah," she said quietly, "will you come back tonight? I feel safer when you're here, and I have more things I need to tell you. Important things about what's going to happen." I assured Emma that I would return for another night shift, though I wasn't sure how much more of her remarkable story I could emotionally handle. The implications of caring for a patient who claimed to have prophetic knowledge about future events, combined with cognitive abilities that challenged everything I knew about human development, were overwhelming my ability to process and understand what was happening. As I drove home that morning, I realized that Emma's case was not just medically unprecedented, but was raising fundamental questions about consciousness, human development, and the nature of existence itself. If her memories and abilities were genuine, they suggested possibilities about human consciousness and near-death experiences that went far beyond current scientific understanding. But more immediately concerning was Emma's apparent fear about her future and her warnings about people who might want to study or harm her because of her unusual abilities. As her primary nurse and seemingly her most trusted advocate, I felt a growing responsibility to protect her interests and ensure that her remarkable gifts didn't become a source of exploitation or harm. The weight of that responsibility, combined with the emotional impact of forming such an intense connection with a patient who defied every aspect of normal medical understanding, was beginning to take a toll on my ability to function professionally. I found myself questioning not just my medical knowledge, but my understanding of reality itself. Emma Walsh was changing everything I thought I knew about infant development, consciousness, and the boundaries between life and death. And somehow she had chosen me as her guide through whatever extraordinary journey lay ahead for both of us. I couldn't sleep that day, tossing and turning as Emma's words echoed in my mind. The prophetic warnings, the detailed memories from before birth, the fear in her tiny voice when she spoke about her future. It all felt like something from a science fiction novel rather than my lived experience as a neonatal nurse. But the documentation in my charts was real. The recordings on the monitoring equipment were genuine, and the emotional connection I felt with this extraordinary infant was undeniable. When I returned to the hospital that evening for my third consecutive night shift with Emma, I found the NICU buzzing with unusual activity. Dr. Chen was in conference with several specialists I didn't recognize, and there were additional monitoring devices around Emma's bedside that hadn't been there when I left that morning. Jennifer and Michael Walsh looked even more exhausted and overwhelmed than they had the night before, clearly struggling to process the attention their daughter's case was attracting. "Nurse Sarah," Jennifer said as soon as she saw me approaching, "Emma has been asking for you all day. She wouldn't talk to any of the other nurses or doctors. She just kept whispering your name and looking toward the door. It's like she's been waiting for you to come back." As I approached Emma's bassinet, her eyes immediately found mine, and I could see what appeared to be relief in her tiny features. "Sarah's back," she whispered, so quietly that only I could hear her. "I was scared you might not come back. There are too many new people here today, and some of them feel wrong to me." The idea that Emma could somehow sense the intentions or character of the medical professionals caring for her was both remarkable and deeply concerning. If she truly possessed some kind of intuitive ability to assess people's motivations, it suggested capabilities that went far beyond advanced cognitive development into territory that challenged scientific understanding completely. "What do you mean when you say some of them feel wrong?" I asked quietly, positioning myself so that our conversation wouldn't be overheard by the specialists still conferring nearby. "The man in the dark suit who was here this afternoon," Emma whispered, her eyes darting toward the group of professionals gathered around Dr. Chen. "He wasn't here to help me get better. He was here to study me like I'm not a real person." And the woman with the clipboard kept asking Mama and Daddy questions about selling my story to people with cameras. My blood ran cold as I processed what Emma was telling me. If her perceptions were accurate, then her case had already attracted attention from researchers and potentially media representatives who viewed her more as a scientific phenomenon than as a vulnerable newborn requiring protection and care. The speed with which her situation was escalating beyond routine medical care was alarming and validated her earlier fears about being exploited. Emma, did you hear what they were saying, or did you just sense that their intentions weren't good? Both, she replied with a certainty that was unsettling coming from someone so young. I can hear much better than other babies, and I understand words that babies aren't supposed to know yet, but I can also feel things about people, like whether they want to help me or use me for something else. Over the next hour, Emma provided detailed accounts of conversations and interactions she had observed throughout the day while appearing to be sleeping or unresponsive. Her recollections included specific quotes from medical consultations, descriptions of documents she had seen specialists reviewing, and accurate assessments of various people's reactions to her case. The level of awareness and retention she demonstrated was extraordinary and deeply troubling. More concerning was her growing anxiety about what she described as increasing pressure on her parents to allow extensive testing and research participation. According to Emma, representatives from multiple medical institutions and research facilities had contacted the Walsh family, offering financial compensation and promising groundbreaking insights into consciousness and human development, in exchange for access to Emma as a research subject. They want to take me away from Mama and Daddy, Emma whispered, her tiny voice trembling with fear. They keep saying it would only be for a little while, but I can see in their thoughts that they want to keep me much longer. They want to do things to my brain to see how it works differently from other babies. The image of Emma being subjected to invasive neurological testing and research procedures was heartbreaking and infuriating. Regardless of how remarkable her abilities might be, she was still a newborn who deserved protection, not exploitation. But I was also beginning to understand that my role as her primary nurse was evolving into something far more complex than standard medical care. Emma, I said softly, I want you to know that I won't let anyone hurt you or take you away from your parents. But I need you to help me understand what's really happening with your abilities so we can figure out the best way to protect you. What she told me over the next several hours would challenge everything I thought I knew about consciousness, death, and the nature of human existence. According to Emma, her memories from before birth weren't vague impressions or dreamlike experiences, but detailed recollections of existing in what she described as a different realm of consciousness, where knowledge and awareness weren't limited by physical brain development. I wasn't supposed to remember any of this when I came back, she explained, her tiny features showing concentration as she struggled to articulate complex concepts. When people die and then return to life, there's usually something that makes them forget what they experienced while they were gone. But something went wrong when I came back, and I kept all the memories and awareness I had gained while I was in the other place. The clinical term for what Emma was describing was a near-death experience with retained memories, but her birth records showed no indication of clinical death or oxygen deprivation that would have triggered such an event. Her APGAR scores had been perfect, her vital signs stable throughout delivery, and there was no medical documentation of any period where she had been clinically deceased. Emma, the doctors say you were never in medical distress during your birth. When do you think you died and came back? It happened so fast that the machines didn't detect it, she whispered. Right when I was being born, something went wrong inside me, not outside. My spirit left my body for what felt like a long time in the other place, but was probably only seconds in this world. When I came back, I brought too much knowledge with me. As Emma continued describing her experience, I found myself documenting what could only be described as the most detailed near-death experience account ever recorded from someone so young. Her descriptions included elements that were consistent with adult NDE reports, encounters with deceased relatives, life reviews, prophetic visions, and experiences of universal knowledge and understanding. But the clarity and detail of her memories were far beyond what should have been possible for someone with her limited neurological development. The most disturbing aspect of her account was her claim that during her time in what she called the other place, she had been shown specific future events related to her unusual condition. According to Emma, she had been warned that her retained memories and abilities would attract attention from people who would want to exploit her for scientific or financial gain, and that she would need to be very careful about who she trusted with knowledge of her true capabilities. They showed me that some people would pretend to want to help me, but really they would want to use me to become famous or make money, Emma whispered, her eyes tracking the movement of medical staff outside her room. They showed me that I would have to hide how much I really know and remember, or bad things would happen to me and my family. That was 3 weeks ago. Emma Walsh and her family were transferred to a private research facility the following Monday after I submitted my resignation. Despite my efforts to advocate for her protection, the hospital administration ultimately decided that her case required specialized study that went beyond our capabilities. The last time I saw Emma, she looked directly at me and whispered, "Remember me, Sarah," with tears in her eyes that no newborn should be able to shed. I've tried to contact the Walsh family multiple times, but the research facility claims they're unavailable for communication. I don't know what's happening to Emma now, but I think about her every day. Sometimes I wonder if I should have done more to protect her, or if there was something else I could have said or documented that would have kept her safe with her parents. Emma changed everything I thought I knew about consciousness, human development, and the mysteries that exist at the very beginning of life. But more than that, she taught me that some knowledge comes with a terrible price, and that not every medical miracle is meant to be studied and exploited. I sleep better now working in family practice, but I'll never forget the baby who whispered secrets about existence that were too profound and dangerous for this world to handle.